Oh.
There it goes. It went on now. I might have hit the button twice. Okay. We're going to study typology. As I said, it's actually a really simple concept. Ology means study of, and type doesn't mean typo, like, you know, you made a mistake. It actually means type. And so when you've got a type, it means something that points to something else but isn't that thing. So like, for example, it's like a shadow. Now you have a shadow, and you know, we've all heard the song about shadows, and you can see your shadow, and your shadow says you're there, something solid is there, or an object is there, but you're not that object if we're looking at the shadow. So the shadow's not the object. You're the person, but the shadow points to you being there. And so it's something that points to the existence or reality of something else. And all throughout the Bible there's types, which are the foundation of typology. So the types are the shadows, or the things that are pointing us to something else or another reality. And typology, depending on what denomination you're talking about, and I say that because there are a lot of different understandings of typology. Depending on who you're talking to, there's a lot of different types of different things in the Bible. Some of them say they ended with the New Testament. Some of them say there are no more types, the types are done, and the only types that you see in the Bible are of Christ, and that's it. So I'll give you an example. We're going to look at different types, but the water from the rock, they say, is a type of Christ. And actually, I think they get that from somewhere in the New Testament. I think it's Hebrews or something like that, somewhere around there. But that's a type of Christ because it's the living water and it's the rock and they struck it, and so that's a really obvious example. But wherever Christ is, there's also always the church, because the church is the bride of Christ, and as we talked about in some of the different teachings, some of the stuff we did on Sunday morning and all that, that it's His will that the church is with Him. So what might be, let's do a little bit of creative thinking before we get started, what might be an example of the church typed in the Old Testament? What might be a type of the church in the Old Testament?
As far as people?
Anybody, yeah. It can be people, it can be a group, it can be a nation, it can be a thing, it can be a person. The Hebrews, exactly. The Hebrews. So the water in the rock is Jesus, and Israel, the Hebrews, are us, are the church. That's a very obvious type. We talked about Eve and being that type of the church, or that type, that image of the church prefigured in Genesis in one of the Bible studies that we did not long ago. Adam was the new Christ, and so the new Christ, or no, Christ was the new Adam, and so the bride had to be there, and so that was Eve. So everywhere that we kind of see the Jesus typed in the Old Testament, the church is there somewhere in the passage too. But unfortunately, people don't tend to teach that type. A lot of other examples for the fivefold exist in the Old Testament. There's a lot of types of the fivefold, but unfortunately it's not taught because everybody doesn't really want to deal with that. But if you look, all there were priests and prophets in the Old Testament, and governmental leaders. And that's important to keep in mind when people start saying stuff like, oh, well, prophets speak to leaders and this and that. Well, Israel was an actual nation. It wasn't like the church is today. The church is not an actual nation in the world and in politics. But when it comes to the fivefold, all of the different prophets are types of other things. And so, for example, Malachi was a type of the apostle because he addressed the leaders and he took on a leadership role. Jeremiah was a type of a pastor, and it's interesting because he also prophesied, the pastor. And so in his role, being who he had that servant's shepherd's heart for the people, and that was his message. Isaiah was a type of the evangelist because his heart was Christ. And so all these different examples are all throughout the Old Testament. Now when it comes to the New Testament, and we'll ask this question, do you think that types and shadows have completely ceased?
No.
No, why? I mean, that's the right answer, but why?
Because they're in there.
Because they're in there. Okay, that's a good
John,
that's a good enough answer.
John be a shadow, or John the Baptist.
John the Baptist,
John the Baptist.
it was a type and a shadow, that's right. That's absolutely correct. And that is that in the New Testament, the way that types exist are a little different. So, for example, we talked about marriage is a type of Christ in the church. And so anytime you've got married people, technically they're a living type, or they're a type. The Bible says that we are the letter written on the hearts of men, and that we are the living letters. And so we are all technically, in Christ, we are all technically a type. We're, evangelism and all this stuff we're called to do, we're supposed to be representing that and representing Christ and shadowing that in everything that we do. So yes, types and shadows still exist, and this is how I teach on them in a little bit of a different level. The literal definition is they are shadowing or showing something else, but they're also little bits and pieces of God revealing himself. Kind of like a puzzle. And so it's like this little bit of God here, and this little bit of God here, and this little bit of God over here. And if we put them together, we get an image or a picture of God. But it's ways that God reveals himself in everyday, ordinary, boring, uninteresting things. Jesus talked about the kingdom of heaven being like pearls and yeast and farmers with barns and wheat and bread and etc. stuff. He took things that everybody could relate to and understand and taught about the kingdom, and that was a type. So every time you have any of those things, it was an understanding or an illustration or a way that God revealed through something very practical and ordinary and boring. And so types are really God being boring. I mean, there are the miracles, if we look at the Old Testament, there were very miraculous things, but rocks really aren't that exciting. Today we got to have really big miracles. God has to show up in white sequins and come down from the sky with a disco ball and announce himself and do great things. I'm here, but we miss the rocks. And we miss the water, and we miss the ordinary ways and the ordinary miracles that God reveals himself in. We want, it's got to be really big, you got to start burn, baby, burn, and have him just come down from the sky. In platforms, I forgot that part. So the whole concept of this, and that also relates to what we've talked about with Logos and with Logos Revelation, and when we talk about Jesus being in the Word and all throughout the Word and all the different types, this is a part of that. It's a part of typology because it relates to creation, it relates to Revelation, and it also means that the church is always where he is, and it's always been a part of that plan like we talked about in Ephesians. And so all of us are types, all of us are supposed to be shadowing something, all of us are supposed to be doing something right, and all of us are not supposed to be all so wrapped up in ourselves that we're not a shadow anymore, we're just nuts. So let's look at, we're going to start in Genesis 4, because there's a lot of places in typology where Jesus is hiding, where the church is hiding, where the fivefold is hiding. Everything in the New Testament is in the Old somewhere, and that's why I'm starting on typology there, because I think that it's a really interesting look. We've always been in the thought of God. It was a plan that God predestined. He knew that we were going to be at this point. And so, as a result, he did all this wonderful stuff, and he revealed himself to us. And it's like you said, everything's in the Word. So, we're going to start in verse 2. I guess it would be 2b, would be where we're starting the second half. In my Bible, it's got a new paragraph. I know that they don't all do that. We know the story. We know the fall. We talked about that. Adam and Eve screwed up. Adam was a jerk. He was. Eve was accountable, but still kind of wanted the serpent to take some of the flack. God made all his stuff, and he threw them out of the garden. Now, there was this wonderful cartoon I once saw, and it said, our New Year's resolution couldn't be eat more fruit. It had to be meet new people. So, that was... Trust more people. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. So Cain and Abel were Adam and Eve's kids. Now there's lots of questions. Did they have other children? Where was everybody else? you know, the Bible doesn't tell us. The Bible has in it who's relevant to the story. And so it doesn't mean that there weren't other kids or other people by this point in time. We don't know how many years there were between chapter 3 and chapter 4. Yes?
Maybe these were just the children that were listed, that they started off the new generation after they were put out of the garden.
Probably.
That's why they didn't list the children before that, because that was irrelevant.
They were irrelevant. Right. That makes sense. That's a very, very good explanation to that. I like that. That they're just, this is who's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody wonders about the ones that are not relevant. And as we had talked about in one thing when we were talking about Jacob and Leah and Rachel and that ridiculous triangle that they all had, the ultimate alpha male mess. I should call it that in that book. The ultimate alpha male mess. He's got 4 women and paid for it his whole life. Not as glamorous as it looks like on TV. What about disabilities, or what about kids that had problems? I'm sure that they existed. I have no doubt in my mind that they existed, but we don't hear about them because they're not a relevant part of the story. But it doesn't mean that because these people were inbred, basically, for so many generations, that there weren't problems. And it's just like I remember that people talk about when you get a dog, in particular the breed I had heard about it was a pit bull. When you get one that's inbred, you get the 4 puppies, and one is so timid they have to put it down, and one is really vicious. And then you get one that's kind of normal, and then you get another one that's kind of somewhere in the middle. And so in that would be what we would call the Punnett square. My mother would always talking about that in terms of genetics. And so most likely when you have inbreeding, yeah, at least 2 out of the 4 kids were okay, but you probably had 2 that had different issues. And maybe they weren't always physical or always obvious, but you had out of the 4, every 4th kid, you had one that probably had something real serious and they died, and you had one that was just very antisocial or had some sort of other problem. Okay, so Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil, and so Cain was the gardener and Abel kept the flocks. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked on favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor, so Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. There are all kinds of theories about why God didn't accept Cain's offering. And some of them are things that we really imply in the text that are not that clearly spelled out. So you've got people who say, well, it's because Cain brought from the ground and the ground was cursed, and you have to have the shedding of blood for the remission of sins. But that wasn't something that was taught this early, and so I'm not going to go there with it. I think that we're reading too much into it and we're trying to make it too deep and theological. I think that what's the most relevant is Cain brought some, and Abel brought the firstborn. And I think that that's more relevant than anything else. So what Cain did is whatever was most convenient and most easy, and doesn't this sound like a lot of people we know in church? They're just getting by and doing whatever it is that they can do, and they're going to expect God to accept that. But Abel brought from the firstborn, and he brought the best from what he had, because firstborn implies that he brought what was choice. And so Abel made a sacrifice. Abel brought from the firstborn, meaning instead of taking it for himself or feeding himself or doing for himself, he gave it to God. Well, Cain just did whatever he wanted. And when Cain's offering wasn't accepted because God knew that that was in his heart, he got mad. And like I said, this sounds like every single church I've been in the past several years. You know, that Cain didn't do the right thing, and then he got mad at the one who did do the right thing, and then he just got mad at God. It's like, all right, God, you know, this is not right, and this is not fair, and I can't believe this, and da-da-da-da-da. So then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? And so that's the key right there. That what he did was not right. He did what he wanted to do. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. So there's a lot of very poignant teaching in here about doing the right thing. And we miss that. We think it's just a story about sibling rivalry and about brothers and I remember they did the children's letters to God years ago, and one of them said, "Dear God, maybe Cain and Abel wouldn't have killed each other so much if they each had their own rooms." And he said, "It works with me and my brother." That's the level of understanding, though, that most people have. This is just sibling rivalry, and they just hate each other, and yada, 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 yada. But what was the problem here was sin. And that sin was waiting to take over Cain or to do something with Cain. But you must master it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother, and Abel killed him. And then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know." People were bad liars even then. I was just thinking, gee, I don't know. You seen him? And then he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Then the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you, and you will be a restless wanderer on the earth." So in this particular story, we have Cain, we have Abel, we have a lamb. Where is Jesus typed in this story? Or where is somebody that we could point out that could be typed? And there's actually another very interesting type in here for us to look at as well. But let's start. Who was Jesus, or where is Jesus in here?
Abel.
In Abel, because he didn't do anything wrong and he was sacrificed. So Abel typed Jesus. Okay. Now there's another interesting thing in here. Anybody have any ideas on who Cain might type?
Sandy does.
Yeah, that he does do that.
Deception.
Somebody else who did something like this. Well, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Judas.
Yeah, but Judas wasn't there. Yeah.
Not. That's why he's a type.
Yeah.
And so you've got Abel, meaning the type of Christ, and you've got the one who sacrificed him, which was Judas, who did it for his own gain, who did it because he wanted money or he wanted power and prestige. And so then you've got a Judas type.
Mm-hmm.
And see, this is stuff you don't usually hear in typology, because we stop at that Abel was Jesus, but we don't look at the surroundings of it. There was a sacrifice involved in here. There was the death because Abel was innocent. And so Abel's type, there had to be somebody to betray him, and that was Cain. And I mean, and Cain really did it very deliberately. And he was going to kill himself like Judas did, but God didn't let him. God let him suffer and live, because he really did not like what was going on. And so in this particular passage, we talk about the land, we talk about the fat portions, we talk about all this stuff in terms of these different things. Where would the church be in here? We'll read more. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear today. You are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
The people, or the people who
Close.
Cain would meet.
Kind of. The land, or the presence of God that protected him, would be the type of the church. And so that everywhere he went, he was marked. And that everywhere that kept him, he would be kept and he would be protected. That would be the type of the safety, or the net, I guess we could say, of the church. And so there's that. And so in the first thing we've got Abel and Cain. Even though Cain did not do the right thing, God still put a mark on him. And we really don't know why that was. Maybe he was giving him time to repent. Maybe he was giving him time to turn around. But he put mercy. And so we put him in that place of mercy where he's protected. And so then you go on and they talk about a whole bunch of generations that we're not going to talk about because they're not that interesting. You know, they're not really anything that we're going to talk about because, you know, you get into, oh, Enoch walked with God and everybody gets all deep about that. It just means Enoch did what he was supposed to do. Enoch walked with God when Cain didn't, and so that would be the beginning and the ending of that. We're going to go to chapter 6 and we're going to look at the flood because this is another interesting story that we've heard a bunch of times, that we read over and over and over again, but there's a lot of symbolism in it that we miss. Has anybody here seen the movie Noah that came out last year? What did you think?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have mixed feelings about it because I feel like they added to it.
They did.
Yeah.
And I'm going to explain that. That movie was based upon the book of Enoch, which is an apocryphal book that was in the Bible and then was not and then was in it and then was out, and they put it in a bunch of times and took it out. And the things that they added to, or the descriptions and the things therein, were from that book. And so it really was never intended to be a biblical account, and the producer has said that, which is why everybody's reaction to it was ridiculous, because it was to be an entertainment factor. You are correct, they did add to it, and there are even things that they added on top of the apocryphal account. But the imagery of the Watchers and the way that they reacted with the earth, all of that plays into the apocryphal account of Enoch. One thing that I found very interesting about that movie is the first thing is how they portrayed Noah as hearing from God, because it really doesn't tell us how God spoke to Noah. And so I find the dream state interesting, that he saw it in dreams, and that was one of the biggest things everybody picked on. But it is possible, and I thought that was interesting. That's what I'm going to say. It's interesting. I'm not saying it's accurate, but it was interesting. And the other thing I thought that was very interesting was the way that they pictured the wickedness of the people. And I thought that was very interesting, and that was very intriguing, and it had me in the Book of Enoch all night. I have a copy of it once I went and saw the movie. But it really did make me think in those particular veins, and from watching that movie I saw the types, which is ironic, but it is true nonetheless. I actually got out the flood accounts and read them and looked at some different things, because the imagery that they used didn't help me to see it. Now, accurate? Probably not. Interesting? Yes. And so all of those things can be for our benefit if we can do it. As far as looking at it from an accuracy perspective, that's a different story. But we start in Genesis 6:1. When men began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them that they chose. Now, I have a very interesting little note here in my Bible. And it says the sons of God. This mysterious description may refer to the sons of Seth, the line of God's people from Adam to Noah, or it may refer to angels, often called sons of God in the Old Testament, however you interpret it. The point is that evil behavior increased in the world, a fact that led to punishment by a flood. If we study Jude and if we study different passages in the New Testament, it does clarify that they were talking about angels. And so, in other words, the angels came down from earth, they saw that things were really good, and this would make sense because the angels are somewhere created in the creation story, and there I would say it's probably on the day with the heavens, and when he says let us make man in our image, it may very well have related not just to him but to the angels. And so they were watching and knowledgeable about what was going on. And we know that angels can assume human form. That's even in the New Testament, that you've entertained strangers with were angels unaware. And so then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. So before that time, if you look at chapter 5, which is not really what we're interested in looking at, you can see people lived like forever. You know, Methuselah and Lamech and old people, and I mean, they give old people a whole new meaning. You know, people go, oh, that old person. No, they don't have first clue what an old person is. So he ended people's lifespan at 120 years, and there are people living that long. There aren't many, but there are people. If you look on the internet, it shows their birthday, and they're sitting there, and they probably don't know what's going on, but you know, they're getting their pictures taken for Facebook. They've probably never been on Facebook. They probably don't know what it is, and someone's sticking a picture in their face that says, "Wish me a happy birthday, I'm 115." They don't know what's going on. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. When the sons of God went to the daughters of men, had children by them, they were heroes of old, men of renown. Do you have Nephilim, or do you have something else in the King James?
Giants.
You have giants, okay. Nephilim is typically understood to be the giants, or people who were really big. That may be a mythical understanding of it. The truth is we really don't know who they were or what they were. But when we see the Nephilim in movies like Noah, that's what the Watchers were. So those big long things that look like rock formations and that walk through, that's supposed to be the Nephilim. Right, that's where that came from. And so they've also been taught to be like guardians of the earth, or kind of like a spiritual guardian or a guiding force. There's a lot of ways that that's interpreted. When the movie came out and everybody said, "That's not the Nephilim, and that's not this, and that's not that," I read a blog where somebody said, "I never saw a bunch of people who don't have the first clue what something was, all agree that it wasn't something." So fast! I mean, we don't really know what they are. But if you look at different studies, and if you look at different movies, and you look at different genres and stuff throughout history, that is a very common image or a very common theme. And I'm trying to think, of course I can't think of anywhere now, I'll think of 15 when I go home. But where that image or that concept of that guiding force, and they take on that kind of a nature. I mean, sometimes they even look like Transformers, or something else. Is there anything in Star Wars like it? I've never seen Star Wars. No, nothing like that.
But
Yes.
it kind of makes sense, because if the angels took on any form, and we don't know what their real form actually looks like, and when they made it with humans, then I can see something coming out.
Becoming
like
giant, or looking odd, or looking
odd.
strange.
They're not going to look like people and just be giants like we portray in movies. The giants look like us, they're just tall. I think that could be pretty.
Right, like you've got a human and an angel, and so they kind of take on that form. And that would be, or that type of an image, and it's in a lot of folklore, it's in a lot of apocryphal stuff, in a lot of stories that are outside of the Bible that are not even Christian. They still have these same images. We talk about giants, Paul Bunyan, or name a giant. Jack and the Beanstalk had a giant. Or if you look at a lot of folk tales and all that stuff, you can really see a lot of
The
it.
bounty guy, what's his name?
The bounty guy?
The big giant guy with the he was the lumberjack or something.
Paul Bunyan. You're thinking of somebody else?
I'm thinking of somebody else.
Okay. Well, if you can think about it, you can call it out if you think of it.
Not Johnny Appleseed, he was more.
No, he was normal. It was not Daniel Boone.
Oh, God.
Who was not tall, who was not a big man, and did not wear a coonskin cap.
We looked
it up. That was one of the most inaccurate shows I think I've ever heard
What
about.
was the one before him?
Dave Crockett.
David
Wasn't that
Crockett.
either. Wasn't that either. Was a statesman in the government. But the images that we have of these things or of these abnormalities, and that they protected or guarded something, is found in a lot of fairy tales, folklore, images. Goliath. Yeah, well, Goliath was a Nephilim, wasn't he? I think that Goliath was taught to be that. And we would say nowadays that they were people who had a certain disorder. And Mother, would you like to tell us about that? Known as giantism. And giantism is actually a pituitary disorder. And when you've got, talking about David and Goliath, they don't have any peripheral vision, and so they literally have tunnel vision, and they cannot see out of either side. And they're very sensitive here and here. And so David knocking him in the head with a rock was completely scientific, that it would have taken him down, because he would have had a pituitary problem. And it would make sense if you've got angels and human beings breeding that they would be aspiring to be heavenward and that they would be that tall or that they would be that thing. And so there's a lot of reference to these creatures in a lot of different things that exist from time forever. In those days and also afterward, verse 4, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. And so that makes perfect sense. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I'm going to wipe mankind, who I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals, and the creatures that move along the ground, and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And that's an old song.
Noah found favor.
That's it. I'm still on Father Abraham had many sons. I was doing it. I was doing it in the house. Wasn't I? Oh, we're doing this at church.
It's so fun.
It is fun. And the one I was thinking of is Rise and Shine.
And get
And get that
I
one.
used to wake my children up with that every morning. They used to still wake.
They didn't like you at times, did they? Okay. And so this is the account of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. I don't know why we make it deep when Enoch walked with God, but Noah did it too. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt and full of violence, and so God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to everything. I'm going to put an end to all the people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark. The Lord told Noah there's going to be a flood. Okay. Build an arky, children up. Okay. Gonna make an ark of cypress wood. I think that song says it was hickory. I'm trying to see. It means, okay, they don't know what the word is. It's uncertain. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks, like the Titanic. I'm going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. In Jewish lore, they give his wife a name, and I can't think of what her name is offhand. It's weird. That's why I can't think of it. And she goes and gets every plant. That's what Noah's wife did. And there's a children's book. I can see the book now with the pictures in it, but that's what she did. That was her role in this. And so Noah did everything just as God commanded him. So, anybody seen, what is it, Evan Almighty?
Yes, that's funny.
Everybody says Evan, all the real deep theologians say it's bogus.
Have you
but
seen it?
Have you seen? Oh, you need to watch Evan
you need to
Almighty.
watch it.
Okay, as bad as the other movie was, you need to watch Evan Almighty. Because it really puts a modern spin on this and shows what happens. We need to have movie night at the church, and we need to watch Evan Almighty. Because
You do that on a Bible study night.
why don't we do that? Okay, why don't we do that? We're going to do Evan Almighty. We have to figure out how we're going to project it.
I don't know.
I'll work on that. Okay. Evan Almighty is, it was a sequel to Bruce Almighty, but I didn't really care for Bruce Almighty, but I liked Evan Almighty. And it really shows how God kept giving this guy messages, and he kept running away from God, and how God kept pulling him back. And how this is exactly what happened. All the animals came to him. I mean, and there was a reason why he was supposed to do what he did. But it shows how difficult it must have been for Noah to do what he did. And we don't think about that. There's 100 years here between God speaking to him however he did it and the water start coming out of the sky. So for 100 years, he hung out with animals and probably didn't smell really good. And for 100 years, he had to be building this ark. And I'm sure his wife said, look, okay, I know it's going to rain, but, you know, the neighbors are mad about the ark, and people coming up and bugging him, and city permits, and he's getting older. I mean, 100 years is a long time. He was already like 500 years old. Oh my God. I mean, you know, think about some of this stuff. And so, like we've been talking about with Hosea, what God asked Noah to do was hard. It wasn't, he was in his retirement, and don't we all hear it with these people? I'm retired, I'm not doing anything, I put in my time. And, you know, they're saying that after, you know, maybe working for 20 years. No, it was 500. So, there you go. That's where it was, and that's what happened. And so we can see that we've got Noah, we've got the flood, and we've got the ark. And all three of those are types of things. So who would Noah be a type of? Obviously, Jesus. And so we put Jesus type. He was a type of Jesus. What did the flood type? Every time it floods somewhere, I say that God did something to that area.
I never heard you say
It's not the church, it's not a shadow of the church.
It's a shadow of baptism.
Oh.
The waters of baptism, the earth got baptized. And so every time it floods, I say, the earth got baptized. Or wherever that was, that state got baptized, because that's literally what happened by the flood. Everything was so corrupt and wicked, so God basically engulfed it in water. They went back to the beginning, and then we started again. And so just like we go down in baptism, and we die in baptism, and we come up to new life. What was the ark a type of?
Church.
The ark is a type of the church, because it was the safety net. That mercy seat, like you talked about with Cain, that it was the place that represented that safety or that mercy or that redemption, that there was going to be something that continued and that went on. We had talked once about it, and we talked about how did they do this? And then we think they're getting this ark ready and they're doing this, and so where did all the animals go while they were waiting? I mean, did he like become the ultimate zookeeper? And then when they were on the boat, how did they do things like with rats? You know, and we looked up how often they multiply or they reproduce, and they would have had exactly enough time from the ark for that to not happen.
Well, the movie said they put them to sleep.
True. Did they put them to sleep in the movie?
And they slept the whole time.
I thought the movie was interesting the way it showed them coming to the ark. You know what I mean? The snakes were crawling, and then groups of them were coming.
I think that would be accurate.
That I would
think
say that was accurate.
so.
Because
Yeah.
there's no way he could have gathered up. Come here, you guys. You know, it's just...
Yeah, well, that's the story originally, what I heard, that it gathered them up, but I saw the movie and that looked, you know.
I would say that was accurate.
Yeah,
I would say that, yeah, because it says, and they would all find him, and so God used their natural instincts, or whatever you want to call that, to have them do that. Come here, fly. Can't you just say that? I'm not going to swatch you. Well, and we wondered about, you know, me and my bugs. I wondered about how did they not get infested? Because where did the animals go to the bathroom, and how did we do all this stuff, and how did they eat? And so how did they not get infested with cockroaches? And so we did some research, and I learned that they float. And that they float. And so the type, cockroaches. So the type of wood that they used on the ark was termite. You couldn't get infested with termites. They didn't nest in it, and they didn't bore it. And so we learned that, you know, rats only reproduce every like 120 days, and termites don't eat cypress wood, and cockroaches are indestructible. That was how we kind of put it. And I mean, I could just see them floating on the water, and it was just funny. But Everybody did, and Noah did everything just as God commanded him. And so there were all kinds of wonderful, miraculous things happening. But I'm sure that after 100 years, and snakes crawling in his bed in the middle of the night, and bears knocking on the front door and letting him know that they were there, that it probably didn't feel quite so miraculous anymore. By the time they got on that ark, it probably wasn't that exciting.
Everybody ran out.
Everybody just left.
Will you let it rain on me?
Well, at this point in time in the Bible, it had never rained.
Right.
It said that it came up from a mist of the ground. And so you've got Noah, like it says in that song by Keith Green, and you hear about Noah toting his umbrella when there wasn't a cloud in the sky. All his neighbors would laugh at his pet giraffe and snicker as he walked by. 100 years, it's going to rain, it's going to rain, it's going to rain. Nobody knew what that was. Everybody went, huh? Really? And so this goes to what we were talking about, too, with prophets and with prophetic lifestyles and with things that go along with them. They really should be doing something not typical.
Mm-hmm.
It really should be something unheard of or weird or out there or...
Facebook.
Not Facebook. They really shouldn't.
Not Facebook.
They're not social.
They really shouldn't be that comfortable with all this normal stuff like she's talking about. You know, apostles are a little bit different and evangelists are a little bit different, and they have a tendency to be a little bit more social, but all these Facebook prophets, thus saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord. No, God didn't say all that. Thus saith the Lord, your latter shall be greater than your former. And I want to say, no, thus saith the song. Because they got that from a song.
Yes, they did.
40 days and 40 nights, something you will not learn in typology in regular classes. 40 is typically a teaching number in biblical numerology, and actually in even, you know, you want to do Kabbalah or occult numerology. 4 is a teaching number. So it represents being taught something, so it's registered as 4 plus 0 would be how they read that. And so when you see 4 in the Bible, it tends to represent being taught something. So you see 40 a lot. 40 years in the wilderness, 40 days and 40 nights on the boat.
You see it. Yeah.
And then if you've got that, they had 40 days and 40 nights. You get 80, and so 8 plus 0, and what does 8 represent? 8 typically represents a new cycle or a new start or a new beginning, like we had talked about the resurrection being the 8th day of the week or the 8th day of creation. It represented a new birth or a new cycle. And so you've got 40 days and 40 nights, and so you've got 2 teaching cycles in there, and then you've got a new cycle or a new beginning. And so there's a lot of hidden stuff that a lot of people don't talk about, or I'm not even going to say hidden, people just don't pay attention. Maybe that's the better way. We think it's a nice children's story, and that, you know, we love to see the little pictures of Noah sticking out of the ark doing this with...
Who's he waiting on?
That's a good point. What's he waiting at?
I don't know. Nobody was friendly to him. I don't know what he was.
Okay, it was like Waterworld. Okay? Kevin Costner talking to himself. I mean, it was like nothing like that. Noah waving and the dove over the head, and it's a white dove, which they didn't have then because those are only bred in captivity. So what he sent out was a pigeon. Now, isn't that unromantic? He sent out a pigeon. And we know from carrier pigeons they can find their way back. But he sent out a pigeon because a pigeon is a dove that is undomesticated. And and the giraffe is sticking its head out the window, and there's a bear over here, and there's a snake up here, and they all are smiling, and everybody's happy. No, I don't think so. I don't think it was quite like that, but that's what we think of Noah. We think it's this cute little cutesy bathtub toy that we're not taking it seriously, or we're not really taking the images seriously. And so they did their things, and he was went through this thing, and then we get to chapter 7. The Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you, and it says here 7, of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, 2 of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. And he says, or 7 pairs is probably more appropriately done. And so first he was taking 2 of everything. Now it got more specific. And it started saying 7 of each kind. But it says here to take with you. So these weren't animals that just arrived at the door.
Right.
He had to go get these, and God only gave him 7 days.
Ooh.
7 days from now I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. And so you've got 7 is considered the God number, or it represents perfection, completion of the cycle. But you had 7 of each, and so technically they were bringing 14 animals. 1 and 4 is 5, and that is the number that represents grace. So they were not just something of completion, they were also a completion of grace. And then he only had 7 days to do it in. So God does ask us to do things that are not convenient or easy. He probably did not sleep. And I wonder how he got them all in 7 days. I mean, did he like go around the world, and was he teleported?
Veronica was there.
Veronica, how did you go? Come here, fly. And at that point in time, you know that there was some animal that was...
Veronica gave him a ride.
Some animal was not cooperative. And you get over here. You know he was doing it. You get over here. You know, just like we do with the dog. We go, come here. Come here. Come here now.
They're like...
I don't know that a cockroach was a clean animal. So he didn't have to get 7 of those. And remember, those were floating. He didn't have to get those.
Whatever mode of transportation you use.
You need it now so we can make some money. That would pay the rent forever if you could bring that back. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him, and we say that like it was just fun. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the flood waters. Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds, and of all creatures that moved along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark. I wonder how long that took. Like I said, because you know there was some animal that wanted to do something.
They looked pretty willing on the movie.
They did.
They were very neat. They were very ordered.
Like somebody whistled and just...
Pairs of clean and unclean animals, birds and all creatures that moved along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the flood waters came on the earth. So I guess that 7-day period was to work stuff out. So we're on another 14-day cycle. It took him 7 days to get them. Then we're all assembling, and now it was another 7 days. And so there's grace again. There's the grace period. And so that grace period represents our time to turn to the Lord, that now is the day of salvation. And so that 2-week period before it all started, where they all got situated and took their few minutes and their time and marched on and weren't difficult and obstinate, is giving us that period to get into the ark of safety. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, because, you know, it was on the calendar, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth and the floodgates of heavens were open. And so they started playing your song, Let It Rain. And we know that song is long, and so it might have played for 40 days. It might have played for 40 days.
We gotta play this song.
You know the one who we borrowed her car to get all the way around the world? Yeah, right, okay. It's her husband, okay. All the springs of the great deep burst forth, and they did show that in the movie.